Does it ever feel like your child doesn't listen to a word you say? Sometimes it can feel like our words are a bit pointless or like we're constantly being ignored. But actually, that's not the truth. As parents, our words have a hidden power, and all children need adults who understand this. I'm going to be talking about this today, but stay tuned until the end of the video for 4 words that every parent needs to be aware of. Hey everyone, I'm Emma and welcome back to my channel. Hit subscribe if you're looking for videos about child development, behaviour, big feelings and children's mental health. Our voices have the power to become white noise that our children simply tune out of and ignore. But we also have the power to use our voices to become our children's soundtrack. We become their inner voice that they carry with them throughout childhood and well into adulthood too. Our words stick, and this can be a positive or a negative thing depending on how we as the parents use this superpower. I'm going to be unpicking how we can be more mindful with the words we use with a simple trick to help us. But first, why do our children ignore certain things we say and only pay attention to some of it? Well, research shows it can take a child up to 15 seconds to process what's been said. So if you're saying to them, put your shoes on, and they're not doing anything, okay, they might not have heard you or they might have been distracted, but even if they have heard you, it can sometimes take 15 seconds for their brain to kind of take that in and for them to then action it. And this is especially true if it's a new instruction that we don't use as part of our daily routine all the time. Maybe shoes wasn't the best example, but you know, if you actually count out how long 15 seconds is and then add on a couple of seconds for our children to actually act upon what we've said, actually when we pause and look at it, quite often our children are just taking a normal processing time to respond to us. But as adults, because things don't happen immediately, we think, well, they're not listening to us, they're rude, they're ignoring us, and we're then saying the next thing. And again, this then takes our children more time to process. So it's not always that our children are ignoring us, sometimes they are just being children. So why do we need to be mindful of the language we use with our children? Often the words that we hear in our own childhood become our default as adults. The way that we view ourselves, whether we are super confident or whether we struggle with our self-esteem, a lot of this can be tracked back to the things that we've been told in our childhood. If you grew up being told that you were clever or kind or wonderful, you probably view yourself and pride yourself on those things now. But if you heard language that was more kind of a bit shameful, whether the adults around you meant to do it or not, you might struggle now more and be more self-critical of yourself. If you were shamed as a child, it's natural if you are a parent who now unintentionally shames your child. Everybody says things at times where they think, well, actually, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And this video isn't so much about that. This video is about language that we might use without even realizing the impact it has. You might be able to think of some of your own words or phrases that have stuck with you from your childhood. For example, I was a child who was described as like bubbly, chatty, friendly in all of my school reports, and I have definitely lived up to that as an adult. Even if I don't feel super confident myself, I know how to be friendly and make the effort. I would be seen as bubbly, I would be seen as confident because I've always been told that I was those things. I've just acted up to that, which again, this is where it can be a really positive thing. We can help our children to see all of those wonderful positive things about them. But we do, as their parents, the people that love them the most and they have the closest relationship with, we do then have to use that as a positive for them. Usually our words come from a well-meaning place, but sometimes it doesn't always benefit our children. The words we heard as children haven't always benefited us, and you'll probably watch this and be able to pick out particular things that you think, oh, actually, yeah, I did hear that a lot in my childhood and I do view myself as that now. And this can almost become like a soundtrack that repeats from one generation to the next unless we pause and think, okay, actually, now I'm aware of this, how can I be more mindful with the things I say to my family? Ultimately, we don't want to be raising children who feel ashamed to be themselves, because we are who we are and we want to help our children to see their good bits, because life, the world, will knock them, and we want to make sure we've kind of given them as much positive self-esteem, loveliness, so that they've got that at their core already. We also don't want to be using language that dismisses their feelings. You know, if they're feeling upset and saying to them, oh, it's no big deal, you know, get over it, no one else is making a fuss. Actually, if you were upset, how would you want somebody to speak to you in that situation? And this is something I always think of myself with my own children, with other people's children, when I'm working with families, is to say, okay, put yourself in that situation. If you're upset, what would you want someone to say to you? And we can do that with almost everything with our children. If we were in their exact position, how would we want somebody to speak to us? It's also really important to mention that I don't mean the language that we use when we're overwhelmed or triggered, or, you know, the language that comes out because we just feel completely like fraught. I don't mean that at all. And that's a conversation for another day. That is a video for another day. This video is not here to make you feel bad or make you feel intimidated or to make you overthink every single thing you say to your child. It's just to start a conversation. I'm just going to share some language with you that you may not have thought of before. I know that there are times where I haven't thought of it, and actually now I look back and think, oh, there was a better way of saying that, and I wish somebody had told me that then. And before I share those 4 words with you, this isn't me saying that you can't use them. It's just the way in which we use them and the way in which our children interpret them. So, meet Anne. Anne stands for always, never, no one, and everyone. And I'm going to unpick it with you so that it sticks in your mind and you're like, oh, there we go again, I've used Anne. Okay, so let's start with always. As a child, I regularly heard the word always. You're always unkind to your brother, you're always doing this, you're always spoiling it. I mean, maybe that was true. Maybe I did wind my brother up. You know, children do these things. I'm not saying I was the perfectly behaved child. But was I always doing something? Like, literally always? No. But it wasn't until I was an adult I thought, actually, I wasn't always doing anything. I was always behaving like a child, but I wasn't always intentionally being unkind. Like, sometimes as adults we say things and we mean them in one way, but our children interpret them in a different way because their brains are different to ours. And I have done another video about that, so I will link that for you. But the way that we say things isn't always heard in the way that we mean it. Our children behave in the way that they do because they're children, and we can often look at that and, you know, if we step back, we can unpick why they behave in a certain way. So if you are seeing a behaviour with your child and you feel like, well, actually, they genuinely are always doing something, then it's worth stopping and looking at why they're doing that and dealing with that behaviour, rather than saying to them, oh, you're always doing this, and pushing it back onto them, because they will grow up to believe that they are an adult who always does something. And I don't think any of us are always doing anything, are we? And again, I'm not saying you can't use the word always. It's just something to be aware of. How often do you use that language with your child? And is there another way of phrasing it? For example, rather than saying, oh, you're always picking on your brother, saying, oh, I've noticed you're finding things tricky with your brother. And trying to unpick that with them, rather than shifting a blame onto them, helping them to think, oh, actually, yeah, I am finding things hard with my sibling at the moment. And what could we all do about that? Okay, so A is for always. The first N is for never. Similarly to the word always, never puts a quantitative perspective on something. Like, you never listen, you never tidy up, you're never doing the right thing. It's like there's a number of times that this has happened. But children see things quite literally, and they might then think, oh, actually, I'm never doing it. So you could say, oh, you're never nice to me. Actually, your child might feel like they are being nice to you. Again, you might feel that. You might feel like they're never tidying up, they're never grateful. All of this, you might feel like that. And it might be because that's what you've heard as a child, or that's what you hear the adults around you say. But again, maybe we could just pause. Is there another way that we could word that? Children don't see the world like we do, and actually it's very difficult for them to see a viewpoint that's different to their own. So they can't see that you are an adult who's trying to make life lovely for them and do really nice things with them, and then they just come across as spoiled or ungrateful. And if you're saying, oh, you're never grateful, it's not that you're wrong in feeling that at all, but for a child, they can't see your perspective, so they then feel misunderstood. And actually, we don't want our children to feel misunderstood. We want them to know that we understand them and we connect with them, because it's so important for that lifelong bond with them. So we've done always, never. The next N is for no one. Even if you aren't using this one yourself, you might have heard another adult say it. This is one I actually hear quite a lot. Things like, no one else is crying, no one else wants to hear you making all that noise. It's one that can be used to try and shut down a child's feelings or emotions or tears or whatever it is at that moment. Phrases like, no one else is making a fuss, leads a child to compare themselves to others, or leads them to think like, oh yeah, no one else is doing the wrong thing, like it's always me. We don't want them to be critical of themselves. And maybe it is true that at that moment, no one is rolling themselves on the floor in the middle aisle of Aldi. Like maybe you're right. Maybe no one else is doing it. But even if it's true, is it kind? Is it helpful? Is it actually going to help you through that situation with your child? Or is it just going to make them feel bad? Ultimately, we want to make our lives as parents easier. So we don't want to be adding like fuel to their flames. What I think it comes down to is we don't want to be raising children who feel shamed or who try and hide their feelings from us, because I don't know about you, but I want to raise children who become teenagers and young adults who still come to me with their problems and with their feelings. And that work starts in early childhood. We can't expect them to be teenagers who share their issues with us if we shut them down when they need us when they're little. And then the last letter of Anne is E, which stands for everyone. Everyone else is doing it, why can't you? Everyone else is sitting nicely, what's wrong with you? As parents, we want to avoid comparison. We want to avoid language that causes our children to compare themselves with their friends or with their family. And actually, comparison can be something that really fuels sibling rivalry. We don't want to be making them feel inadequate or like they're not good enough. So we've looked at Anne, always, never, no one and everyone, and I really hope at this point you're not feeling like, oh goodness, I've been saying all of these things and feeling bad, because I'm qualified in this stuff and I use this language for far longer than I would like to admit. So what should parents do instead? Firstly, do not give yourself a hard time if you've been using these phrases. I reckon I'd been a qualified teacher for a good few years before I used phrases like, come on Boris, everyone else is sitting nicely, no one else is making a fuss. Even if these things were true, they weren't kind, and they should not have come from me as a trusted adult to these children. We don't know what we don't know, and until I'd become aware of these words, I didn't realise I shouldn't have said them. I hadn't thought through the consequences of how a child might have felt if I did say them. And I'm guessing that's true for probably most other parents on the planet too. If you find that you're falling into the Anne trap and you're using these words more often than you'd like to, or you're now thinking, oh, actually, yeah, maybe there is another way, my advice would be to become the most curious critter you can be. And what I mean by that is, when you're addressing something with your child, try to be curious rather than critical. Use phrases like, what's going on for you? Or what do you need when your child is behaving in a way that's out of character or in a way that you wouldn't typically accept. It is never too late to change the way we speak to our children. I mean, I've just used one of the words there. They're not banned. We can use them when they're true. We can just be more mindful in the way that we use them with our children. If you are finding it hard to keep a lid on the way you speak to your children and you're feeling like you're overwhelmed or dysregulated and you're saying things you almost instantly regret, then I do have another video that you might like to check out. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to click subscribe for more weekly updates like this.